Hello, welcome to Gin Opinion. I'm Lloyd Barwick, and today we're off to Lymington in the New Forest to meet Richard Baker, owner and distiller of Dancing Cows Distillery. So we're going to have a chat with Richard. So while I drive there, you watch the cool intro and I'll see you on the other side. Welcome to Gin Opinion. We're here today at the Dancing Cows Distillery in Lymington, and we're here with Richard Baker, owner and distiller at Dancing Cows. So firstly, Richard, thank you for having us today.
No problem.
Thank you for giving up your time. I know you're a busy man. So the first question obviously is gin. How did you come into gin and where did you come from?
Well, it goes back a fairly long time and quite a long distance. I was the Economic Development Agency manager in the Falkland Islands, 8,000 miles away, for 4 years in the early 2000s. And in 2003, I finished my contract and I didn't really see myself ever wearing a suit. I'd got into agriculture and food and drink and tourism and provenance and organics, and I really wanted to carry that on and develop it. And it was just at the point when microbrewing was really getting into its stride, and I thought I was a bit late getting into brewing because there were 250 brewers at that time in the country, and a friend of mine had an empty barn in an old cow shed in Lancashire, and I wanted to brew beer and interesting beers, and so I think now there's something like 2,500 brewers, and so we had 11 good years, even though it was when we went through the recession and those black days. But up in Lancashire, people were still drinking a lot of beer, and we won some awards and had a good time. But all the time I was dabbling with distilling. I'm an engineer and I love toys, and I love engineering components and processes. And slowly I sort of got into distilling, just practicing in the shed, obviously, and eventually decided that after 11 years somebody wanted to buy the brewery, and we wanted to move south, my ex-wife and I, and we headed down here, and I decided I would have a go at distilling. And gin is obviously the very sexy product at the moment. I like to make rum and whiskey as well, but they are labours of love because you have to make a huge amount of liquid and takes a long time to make it, whereas gin is a relatively quick way of making. I mean, this morning I made a batch of a brand new gin, and it took me about an hour and a half, having come up with a recipe, to actually produce a bottle which we can then take to the customer and say, are you happy with this? Now with whiskey that would take months to go through that whole process. So gin is obviously a very sexy product at the moment. Lots of people want it. It's sort of exploded, and then we've then had the second tier of flavoured gins, which has sort of expanded the industry even more, and it's an exciting time to be making gin. Yeah.
Well, we're so glad you came south and you're here in Lymington. You're only about 12 miles from the shop, which is fantastic because we know we can always get some gin from you when we need it, and we do need it on a regular basis because your gins do sell very well for us in the shop because they are lovely gins, and they are produced in this beautiful beast that we're stood in front of, which is I can see 4 plates up there.
Yes.
Yeah, 4 plate column still.
Yep.
And it's fantastic.
And then there's a deflegmator at the top.
A deflegmator at the top. Right. I'll have to go back and have a look at deflegmation. I have read about it, but I can't recall. But so where did she come from? And does she have a name?
Well, she used to have a name, but I won't go through that. As I said, my ex-wife. But she's an Italian still, and one of the problems I had was when I started the project, it was just after the first phase of distilleries had opened, and in Germany they went from, say, a 1-year lead time to a 3 or 4 year lead time. And in America, I went to America and spent some time in Michigan, to get some commercial distilling experience, but also to look at equipment manufacturers. In America, they weren't interested at all because the American expansion means that they don't need to export stills. And you went from a situation in this country where John Doerr were making 1 still a year at most, And up in Scotland, there's one distillery maker up there, and they were making one still a year. Suddenly you have this massive expansion and not enough skilled people, because it's a specialist process and a specialist way of making them. And so I was lucky, and I managed to find this company in Italy, Artisan, and they were desperate to get a still into the UK. So it was sort of a marriage made in heaven. I went to see them, and we spent the whole day Google translating, because they didn't speak any English, and managed to get it. And it's quite unique in many ways, because it's got a kerosene burner on the side. So rather than having a separate steam generator and pipework, all the steam is in here. So it's a really efficient way of doing things. And in fact, the kerosene, the people who sell me the kerosene are always ringing up saying, "What the hell's going on? You're not using enough. You're not using any." And it means that everything's compact, because space is obviously of a premium to us. But it's a 500 litre still, so we can produce something like 480 bottles of gin, and it takes about 3.5 hours from start to finish.
Excellent, isn't it?
In terms of getting it into the tanks. Once it's in the tanks, then there's a...
So really sorry about that, folks. The battery ran out on the camera. So you can see we're still new, but we'll carry on regardless. And hopefully we haven't embarrassed Richard at all. So to finish off with the still, Richard, it's a great still, and I know you make several gins. And if we could get on to the gins now, you have, as far as I know, you have a Lymington dry gin, Myristica, which is Sally's absolute favourite and one of our favourite flavoured gins, fruit gins, Sopley rhubarb, a strawberry liqueur, and have I got them all there?
Oak aged.
Oak aged, of course.
Yep.
And as you say, you also make rum and whiskey, but we're here for the gin, so we will leave those to one side. And you've told us
we do other seasonal gins as well.
Of course, you do seasonal.
Damson gin, Sloan
yes,
cinnamon
exactly.
gin at Christmas.
Yeah, we've had the seasonals at Christmas,
and whatever comes through. So we've made hibiscus and peach. We made a plum.
Yes,
we do a special. There are cherry plums that grow locally.
Yep.
And we use those in a gin for the Cliff House at Barton-on-Sea.
That's right, because you make some exclusive gins for various places.
Blackberry gins. I mean, this year seems to be a really good year for blackberry, so I'm planning a blackberry gin.
Oh, that'd be nice. We'll look
Apple vodka.
Yep.
So there's a whole range of things. Whatever's seasonal and comes through.
Yep.
And a lot of it we buy from people like the New Forest Fruit Company over at East Boulder or Walhampton.
Yeah, and I know you use Sopley, Dan Tanner's at Sopley.
Yeah, we use Sopley. But if we can pick it from the hedgerows, we will. But time is an issue.
Yes.
Picking strawberries locally is not something I want to spend time doing. When you can buy them relatively cheap. Because we can buy like the small blueberries that nobody else wants. People want the big blueberries. Yeah. So we get the sort of class B stuff, which it's going into spirit, so it doesn't really matter. And that saves us a little bit of money. And it makes them smile because they're able to use the full crop as well. So,
and I know you have New Forest Mark on your bottles as well, don't you?
Everything's got New Forest Mark on.
Yeah, so that's great.
Really important. And I mean, I've worked with regional marks. I set one up in the Falkland Islands, but this really works because you have to be in the New Forest. It's not 10 miles outside. I mean, Hampshire Fair is a lovely thing, but you can have it, and you can be in Guildford, which is in Surrey. But New Forest is very, very definite. You have to make the stuff in the New Forest. And at least 25% of your ingredients have to come from the New Forest as well. So it means you're forced to work with foragers. And there's a lady up the road at Naked Jam, Naked Jam I should say, who I quite often send a picture of something and say, is this a hazelnut or a cobnut? Can I use this in my gin or whatever? And she tells me if I'm about to poison everyone. So we work with foragers, we work with growers, we work with farmers, and it really forces us to work hard. And then one of the lovely things which has come out of it is the New Forest Spring Water Company, who we do a lot of work with. All our finished water that goes into the gin comes from a spring just outside Fordingbridge, between Fordingbridge and Ringwood, South Gawley, and we take empty containers up, fill them with water, give them a bottle of gin. Everyone's happy, and it's a great relationship.
Fair exchange is no robbery,
Absolutely,
is it?
Yeah. And we're now looking at a range of tonics and soft drinks, working with them to maximise the flavours of our gins with their tonics.
Oh, fantastic! Look forward to those. Absolutely. Yeah. So, getting on to the gins then. Lymington Dry. Now I said when we came in today, I said, oh, Lymington Dry is a London Dry, but you corrected me because you said it's infused.
It's infused.
So I'm assuming you make a traditional London Dry as a base.
Essentially, yeah. It's a gin that's distilled.
Yeah, and then what do you infuse the Lymington Dry with?
Blueberries.
Blueberries.
Blueberries from East Boulder, and the blueberries are not a. It's not designed to be a really sort of big blueberry flavour. It's just a layer, and it gives a light golden colour. And depending on how long I get to steep the berries, that determines how gold that colour is. So because we're small batch, you might find one batch is a deeper gold than the next. And the blueberries just give it this background layer of flavour rather than it giving a too strong a fruit flavour. I mean, I'm not a huge fan of these really strong flavoured blackberry or
me also,
blackcurrant gins. I mean, to me, they're flavoured vodkas rather than gins.
I call them fruit juice gins.
Absolutely, yeah. They're designed for people who don't like gin.
I agree. So there we are, Lymington Dry, then Myristica. Now, Myristica is the botanical name for nutmeg, am I correct?
Myristica fragrans is the Latin name for nutmeg.
Okay, yes. But that's what's on the bottle.
Yes.
And yet the bottle has, for flavour, fresh raspberries, am I right? Vanilla.
Yes.
And nutmeg.
Yes. It started off life as a nutmeg gin.
Okay.
And it's quite interesting how the world has changed, because I actually took a bottle to a tasting in, well, about 2 years ago. I can't remember exactly when, maybe 2.5 years ago. And it was a nutmeg infused gin, and it was pale gold. And people were quite amazed that gin could be a different colour to clear. And people were quite scathing about it. They would not go near it because it had a colour. And of course now, I'm getting the opposite. I'm ringing people up and they're saying, we can't sell the Lymington gin because it's clear. We want coloured gins. We want pink and blue. And so the world has shifted massively. But what I discovered was that not everyone was quite as keen on nutmeg as I was. And after some trials and reading some books, I've got a thesaurus of flavours, which a woman wrote a few years ago. And raspberry seemed to be a good thing, and vanilla as well. And very few people get the vanilla. It's like 1 in 25 people go, oh yeah, I can taste the vanilla. People aren't really sensitive to it. The raspberry, virtually everybody gets. And I would say 1 in 10 to 1 in 5 get the nutmeg in a big way. And but the three of them together seem to work really nicely.
We think they certainly do. As I say, it's probably our favourite flavoured gin. Because the raspberries are crisp and fresh. It's not sickly sweet syrupy gin, it's just gin with a little extra. And we absolutely love Myristica, and it's probably our biggest selling flavoured gin in the shop. So we come on to...
You're my biggest selling customer, I would say, of Myristica.
Fantastic. So we come on to your next gin, which is rhubarb, Sopley rhubarb. And rhubarb is a big flavour in gin. We get asked for it a lot. We sell a lot of rhubarb gin from several different distilleries. And it just seems to work with gin very well, rhubarb. Do you find that it's a sort of match made in heaven?
It's an ideal flavour to go with a gin and tonic, I think. And I didn't want to make a liqueur, because there are a few out there and they're quite low alcohol, and people quite often say to me, oh, the so-and-so's rhubarb gin is so smooth. And I
Edinburgh's.
I didn't want to mention. I didn't want to mention. But it's 17%, I think, and full of sugar. So it will be quite smooth. So this is a proper gin, and Sopley rhubarb is obviously, but other people might not. It's not far from here, near Christchurch. And the rhubarb is quite thin and fairly sharp. And that comes through in the gin. And what I'm finding now is, I was always very worried about putting too much into the flavours of the gin. So with the oak aged, I was always really conscious that a lot of very high tannin, high oak gins out there that do it. And I've been very cautious in the time that I leave stuff in. And same with the rhubarb. The rhubarb I would leave in for a week at most, because I was worried about the tannins coming through. And I now find that generally after a week you don't get anything more developing, but you get a little bit more of the layers of stuff. So I'm leaving stuff in a bit longer now, maybe a couple of weeks with the rhubarb, and it really does add to the flavour, and gives it a bit more texture as well, I think. So yeah, I think rhubarb is a lovely thing to add to gin, and if you can find a local rhubarb as well, it's even better.
Perfect. So finally, oak aged. which is your Lymington Dry,
Yep.
aged in oak barrels or rested in oak barrels.
Rested.
Should I say rested? Yep. For how long?
Well, as I say, it used to be.
Do you want to cut that there? Yeah. We'll come. So, sorry about that, folks. We had a small interruption, but we'll get straight back to it with Richard. So, oak aged gin, Richard, rested in the oak barrels, and you were just about to tell us for how long and you know what that brings to the gin.
Well, when I started, I was very conscious of not having too much tannin in, and we use a combination of American oak and sherry cask wood. So we use Oloroso sherry cask, and at the moment we're actually steeping it for a week. I may try even 2 weeks. It was 2 days, and we don't seem to be getting too much tannin, but we're getting a little bit more depth of flavour from the wood. Now I've got a plan. I've actually had some wood, some silver birch wood, which I released from Pennington Common, which has been drying for about 18 months, 2 years now, and that's going to be released, chopped up into chunks, and then charred lightly, and so we're going to use that in a new version of a silver birch aged gin.
Because of course birch sap wine is a very, very good wine, and we've made it ourselves when we used to make wine, so the birch
you'd think it should work. I have no idea what it's going to taste like after it's been aged and dried and charred, but we'll find out. That's the beauty of doing this. And on the scale that we're working at, we can do 10 bottles, 20 bottles. It's not as though I'm risking a huge amount of gin to do that. And we can get a feeling for how it might develop over time as well. So yeah, looking forward to trying that. And then as the year progresses, new fruits come through, new things come through. We try and keep the thing fresh, have at least one new gin each month coming through, and there are events like Valentine's Day where we can get special bottles.
Of course, we had your Valentine's gin last year, and it was beautiful. The bottle was absolutely stunning, wasn't it? In the heart shape, lovely. And today you've allowed us to taste a brand new gin, which you're doing exclusively for somewhere whose name will remain
At the
secret.
moment, I think we should keep it
it's
quiet.
orange thyme, and it's beautiful. The orange thyme works absolutely wonderfully with it, and it stays. When I had a sip, it stayed with me, the orange thyme, for many minutes, which is a great result with a gin. A great,
well, it's the wonderful thing about gins as well, is that you can do that at home. And I always say to people, put a sprig of rosemary in cheap gin, and it will change it. It'll make it, really lovely. And I'm lucky in that where I live, I've got a market on a Thursday with a gentleman there who comes and brings all his plants, and he has a lot of herbs. So there's pineapple mint, and I'm allowed to nibble and try a few things. And the orange thyme in particular I like. Lemon verbena we've had a go at. We've had all sorts of things that we've put in. And infusing it is a way of really judging on whether it's going to really add value. When you distill it, it tends to reduce the impact of it. But when you infuse it, and you get the lovely colours come through from the herbs as well, and it's a really nice thing to do. Put some fruits in. Everyone does slow gin, or a lot of people do slow gin, but people don't think necessarily of doing their own blackberry gin or their own strawberry gin. And it's such an easy, nice thing to do. You know? And then the other lovely thing is you've got the fruit, which you can then make a crumble out of.
Of course.
And a couple of weeks ago, I had relatives over, and I made a cherry plum
an alcoholic
crumble,
cherry.
and it was just to die for. It really was.
So they're your sort of, shall I call them your signature gins, and then you make seasonal gins also. And I know we've already mentioned you did a cinnamon and slow and cinnamon for last Christmas, which we had in the shop.
I just felt slow was a bit overdone. Lots of people do it, and cinnamon adds a Christmassy feel to it.
Well, we
be
mould.
careful with it.
We mould that in the shop. We did a couple of gin discovery evenings, and we put that on as our last gin of the evening, and we heated it in a slow cooker, and Sally put some cloves and some bits of anise and bits and pieces in, and it just made the most beautiful mulled gin. It was perfect for that time of year. It really was lovely. So peach and hibiscus you did as well. And remind me of the others. Damson.
And we've got some bullaces, which are cross between a damson and a slow. I've got a few kilos of that this year, which has been in the freezer, so we'll use that. We've got a new raspberry vodka coming through, which just about to do, which I've got to clear some space in the freezer, so the raspberries have to go into something. So there's always something new coming along, and it's just identifying the right product at the right time, and being able to get good quality fruit to go into it. Apple vodka in the autumn when apples are available, and things like that. So yeah, we're always coming up with new stuff. And I mean, last year some people brought in you're talking about mulled, they brought in a mulled gin, and I thought it was going to be horrid because they just had those bags of the mixed mulled spirits, nothing like Sally's creative cloves, and I'm sure it was wonderful. And it turned out to be absolutely lovely. I mean, I left it for a while thinking hopefully they won't come back, and eventually they did, and I had to try it with them, but it was lovely. So we might do a mulled gin this year just to keep things fresh.
It does work really well. It seems to be a lovely drink for Christmas, mulled gin. And
all through the hedgerows you've got Angelica. So we've been cropping, I mean, good year again for Angelica. So Angelica seeds, we put in the gins, or a lot of the gins. There's always something out there which you can pick. And it's really nice. Rowan berries, this year we've again had a good crop of rowan berries. So they don't add an awful lot of flavour, but they do give acidity, and they lengthen the gin, which is nice. But with the little still, we've got 3 stills. We've got obviously the big one, and then we've got a 25 litre still, which can produce bespoke batches of say 20 bottles, and then we've got the little baby still, which does a litre, and that's great because in an hour I can test a new recipe, and as you've seen the orange time
for sure. You brought that little still to our shop one evening, and we had a crowd of gin fans in. And you did for us a fantastic little distillation over a period of an hour and a half, and it was just so interesting, so great to see how it's made and how the different botanical flavours come through at different times during the distillation.
That's what people don't realise is just how sort of complicated it can be in terms of selecting those elements and deciding which ones go in and which ones don't. I mean, we've done some trials with honey, local honey, and I'm going to use it more and more in gins because it gives texture, but it's really interesting how it comes out at the end. You don't get it until right at the end, and then suddenly it's there. Lavender, on the other hand, lavender comes out right at the beginning and can actually ruin your palate because all you get is lavender for the rest of the evening. So it's trying to juggle those two together. But we have come up with a lavender and honey mix, which is really nice. But you've got to be really cautious with the lavender.
We have a lavender gin, which we won't mention, but it only has 1% of lavender distillate in it, we're told, and yet the lavender just hits you straight in the face, and there is no other flavour after that. It's lavender. I love it, but it's one of those gins that you either love or hate, that lavender flavour in particular. So thank you very much, Richard. It's been great talking to you today, and it's been great looking around the distillery, and it is a very, very busy distillery, as we can see, and we love your new gins as you bring them through, and we love your signature gins, Myristica, the Dry, the Rhubarb. They're all really good, and we love to have them in the shop. So thanks very much for today, and we'll be seeing you again shortly, I'm sure. Thank you, Richard. Thanks for your time.
Cheers, Lloyd.